Hey, what's up, and welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and Twitter and answer them here in video format. A ton of questions to get into today, so let's just jump right into it. First question is from AM, I'm gonna just say AM, who says, aside from the potential Watson suspension, since we don't know if, let me put it on screen for y'all, my bad, since we don't know if or when and how long, what part of the team post-draft do you think could hold the team back from the playoffs, Super Bowl that they're gunning for? Okay, so yeah, obviously the obvious answer, as you pointed out, would be Watson. But other than Watson, right, I would say it would be along the lines of scrimmages, right? Because I feel real confident about this team's ability to have depth when it comes to the defensive backs and all of that. I have confidence that the upgrade in the quarterback position and what they've done to the wide receiver room, that's enough for what they need to do. I have extreme confidence in that running back room, in the linebacking room, and all of that, right? Like, those aren't areas in which I would have any concern about. But the one area of this team that I do have a little bit of a concern about is along the lines of scrimmages. One, they have not signed Jadeveon Clowney yet. We don't know if they're going to do it. We hope that they do. I think it's very likely. But let's live in a world where they don't have Jadeveon Clowney. All of a sudden, that defensive line becomes a bit of a concern because, yes, they got Perrion Winfrey. Yeah, they got Taven Bryant, but they really don't have anybody to anchor that other side that I feel any confidence in. Also, that's going to make Myles Garrett's life harder, and I think a lot of what you could get out of Perrion Winfrey in a rookie year kind of depends on making sure that you have those edges solidified to the point to where, you know, you're throwing out somebody who people respect on a high level, like a Jadeveon Clowney, when it comes to how offensive lines protect against a guy like that. Now, when we roll this to the other side, I also have concerns about the offensive line because, let's be honest here, there are two All-Pros that are at guard who I think are going to be solid no matter what. And then you have question marks, right? Jedrick Wills is not a huge question mark. We know he can pass protect. We also know he has issues as a run blocker. He's heading into his third year, so maybe he makes that leap and becomes a permanent staple on this offensive line. Like, it's very likely that he could become, right? He's been a pretty good offensive lineman throughout his career, had a couple of bad games when he got injured last year, but other than that, I think he's been fine. Nick Harris is a question mark, right, at center, right, because he struggled heavily at guard. That's a different position. But he did struggle mightily at at center. So that is part of the problem there, right? So you don't know what he's going to bring. And then you have Jack Conklin / James Hudson. Let's be honest here. Jack Conklin is not going to play a whole 17-game season. Like, I would be very shocked if Jack Conklin plays an entire 17-game season. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you're going to rely on James Hudson for at least 4 to 5 games, right? I would think, right? This is Jack Conklin missed almost the entire season last year with multiple injuries. I would think that would be the case for James Hudson. So, yeah, on paper right now, you're only relying on one new offensive lineman, but in practice, Jedrick Wills has had injury issues. Jack Conklin has had injury issues. We don't know what Nick Harris is going to be like as a starting center in the NFL, right? They have some insurance policies back there, right? Hub's still on the team. They signed a one center from Seattle or Arizona. So they have backup plans. But if all three of those plans break down, and it's not a 0% chance that doesn't happen, then it starts to get real shaky. Also consider that Deshaun Watson does things, he does things very well as a quarterback, but one of the things he does not do well is sometimes put his offensive line in the best position to protect him because he can roll out, hold on to the ball a little bit longer. That's just part of the package that you deal with Deshaun Watson because you know how spectacular he is. But again, I would worry about that because if the offensive line gets hurt, or if the offensive line is not as good as we hope, that could make the Browns' level of difficulty on scoring drives rise up. And what I mean by that is, instead of scoring on some pretty clean drives where you're not really behind the sticks much, yeah, you might be able to score, but it might be, you have to convert 2 3rd and 20s to get it done, right? And the level of difficulty to get points on the board slows down your ability to put points on the board. This is kind of why Watson was so good in 2020, and despite him being so good in 2020, the Texans were a terrible team, is because the level of difficulty in order to score was tremendous, right? He had to convert a lot of third and longs and a lot of crazy down and distances in order to make that happen. So you would hope one of the benefits of getting Watson here in Cleveland is, hey, we're going to make that level of difficulty to score much, much, much easier on you than it was in Houston. But if that offensive line goes down, then, all of a sudden we're looking at a very, very similar situation. Now, ultimately, we're more deep on offense than Houston was in 2020, but still the same principle remains. The next question comes from Ian, who says, do you think the college basketball player that the Browns signed actually has a chance to make the team, or was this just a goofy signing on the part of the Browns? I mean, it was a fun signing. Like, this is just one of those fun camp things that we can follow. That could be a fun camp story, right? This guy's any good, great. He follows a lineage of former basketball players that have turned into good NFL tight ends. But that don't mean that you can just scrape up anybody off the dirt from basketball and then make them a Hall of Fame tight end, right? So, temper your expectations. I would just say this. Just look at it as a fun thing, right? Like, hey, let's see. Because ultimately, if he does make the team, he's going to be, the third tight end? Like, it don't matter, right? You know what I mean? So this is just one of those fun things. It's going to make the fourth quarter of those preseason games much more interesting. You know what I mean? Like, it's like when Terrell Pryor switched to wide receiver, except for the Browns were sorry then, so we actually relied on Terrell Pryor a lot. But it's one of those things. It just makes camp fun. It gives you one thing to track. You know what I mean? And it's a fun thing for them. It's a fun thing for the team. And hey, they can take a chance on the guy, and then maybe it works out, right? Maybe this guy becomes a good tight end. Who knows? Why not at this point, right? There were no great tight ends in this draft class anyway. Well, there were no great tight end prospects. There might end up being a great tight end, but no great tight end prospects in this draft class. John Jonas, who says, how long do you think Nick Chubb has of putting up these numbers? And do you think we'll continue to surround him with good backs to split the workload as he ages, so he won't have a massive fall off? Or do you think an analytical front office won't extend him, no matter the numbers contract-wise after this contract? Now, I've been surprised on this front before because I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't expect Nick Chubb to get past his rookie deal with Andrew Berry and company, but they have done it, and they have shown that they're willing to spend at positions that typically analytics-oriented front offices wouldn't be willing to spend on. But when it comes to Nick Chubb, I think there are two separate questions that need to be answered in this one question. One, do I think Nick Chubb will have a steep fall off? Most running backs do. Right? So you have to prepare for most likely scenario. Now, there are some running backs that run forever. Frank Gore ran forever. LaShawn McCoy ran for a relatively long time considering what his play style was, right? I think he did 12 years in the NFL. He was only useless at that 13th, 14th year when he was in Tampa Bay, and he was still kind of useful then. You know what I mean? So running backs have a varying shelf life. Most of them, I would say 75% of running backs age like, milk, right? They age like McDonald's fries, right? Where they just get cold quick, but when they hot, they hot. Todd Gurley is a great example of this, right? Where he was hot for 2 years, out the league, can't even get a call back now. Now, a lot of that's due to injury, but again, running back's going to be an injury-prone position. So we have no idea. I have no idea how Nick Chubb's going to age. I would like to think he's going to be one of those running backs that does age well. I don't know if the Browns bet on that, right? Adrian Peterson's also somebody who ran for 20 years. Think about that draft class, though, real quick. Just a quick side tangent. 2007 had the greatest wide receiver of its generation in Calvin Johnson, the greatest left tackle in his generation in Joe Thomas, and the greatest running back in his generation in Adrian Peterson. And Adrian Peterson played last year. All them other dudes are Hall of Fame eligible about right now. Right, I think Calvin Johnson's in. That's how long Adrian Peterson, as a running back, and how his career is so spectacular, is that he's had that longevity. Despite him playing in the least long, you would have thought Joe Thomas would have been the longest lasting one out of all of them. But yeah, that's how things go with running backs. Most of them, after that initial run, they're done. Some of them, they can run for 25 years. It really depends. I don't know if the Browns make that bet. I would think that this next contract is probably going to be his last contract with the Cleveland Browns. Maybe they add in a couple-year extension or a franchise tag year here or there, but I just don't see Nick Chubb. Unfortunately, I think Nick Chubb is going to have one of those 15-year careers. I just don't think they're all going to be with Cleveland. Unfortunately, I think the Browns are going to cut bait with that a little bit sooner, just because the numbers would tell you don't want to stick with the running back for as long as you would have to stick with Nick Chubb to see his full career or at least I'm anticipating. The next question comes from Iceman Boss, who says, is my distrust in Wright's strength about his tape or his testing numbers? I know he had a pec injury, also with Perion attitude rub on with the other defensive tackles. I don't know. People are how they are, right? Like, we're around different types of people all the time that don't necessarily change who we are at the end of the day. But as far as the strength numbers go, I got a lot of this, and I don't know where it came from, because even when I brought up his bench press numbers, that they weren't impressive, I put the caveat on there that it's not really a big deal that he only did 15 bench press just because his arms are so long. And when it comes to bench press, the longer your arms are, the more different of a workout that becomes for everybody else, right? 35-inch arm dudes, if they can do 15 at 225, that's pretty good. Well, it's not pretty good. It's not great. He had a torn pec or anything, but I don't really look at the bench press as the barometer of your strength for a guy with that kind of length, just because at that length, it's very unreliable of a measurement there, because it's just so much harder for somebody with long arms to bench press. This is why the bench press is pretty much useless in the basketball combine, and why you never hear about it, because all those guys are super long. But again, when it comes to Alex Wright, my distrust of his strength is because when I seen him go against stronger tackles or guards at UAB, and again, tape's limited coming out of UAB. There's not a lot to look at there. There's not a lot on the internet available, unfortunately. But it just didn't look too strong to me. You know what I mean? I saw a guy who got stood up a lot. Guy who didn't look powerful against powerful players. Like, he would dominate, small guys that ain't never going to lick in the NFL. But I don't know if he can dominate, big time players. And that's my worry about him, right? He reminds me a lot of Jordan Elliott, and Jordan Elliott, coming out of Missouri, had the same problems that I worry about with Alex Wright. So that's a little bit of my distrust there with the strength, with him. It didn't really have anything to do with the pec or the bench press numbers. Again, once you're that long, it really don't matter, right? I didn't care about Perion's bench press number. I'm not going to care about Alex Wright's bench press number, because, once you're that long, it don't matter. Same thing with Jordan Davis. Next question comes from Card Sharks, who says, do you think Baker Mayfield's contract is the reason why QnA, Jarvis, and other free agent wide receivers haven't been signed yet? Also, what wide receiver would you like to see the Browns sign other than Jarvis? I think if it's not going to be Jarvis, we're probably good. I don't want to bring in another like Will Fuller or anything and rely on him unless he gets injured. But when it comes to Baker Mayfield's contract, is that what's holding up the Jarvis and Clowney thing? I don't think so. I think what's holding up any free agent moves from the Browns is, one, do they really want to do it? And two, they have announced a lot of moves that will free up some cap space, but a lot of those moves don't really come into effect as far as like you actually getting that cap space until June 1st. So what do I mean by that for those who are not, who don't know? Okay, so for example, right, when they cut Austin Hooper, the report was Browns saved $20 million by cutting Austin Hooper, however many million they saved. That is true, but it does not clear off the Browns books until June 1st, because he's a June 1st destination. Some of these contract reconstructions that they did, right? They did one with Jack Conklin. I forget who else they did one with, but they did a lot of contract reconstruction. Some of that only hits after June 1st because of certain roster bonuses that accelerate in certain contracts that start to convert guarantees into non-guarantees that take it off the cap and everything else. So those kind of mechanisms are why I think the Browns ain't doing nothing. We'll see what happens post June 1st. But I don't think the Baker Mayfield contract is really holding anything up, because you're really allocating the Baker Mayfield money under what should be the Deshaun Watson money, right? Because at 18, because you only had Deshaun under $1 million this year for a cap hit. It's like a ridiculously low cap hit because of his new restructured contract. So Baker's money fits there. So does Jacoby Brissett's money. That's going to be under $30 million anyways. So that's not the money that's holding things up. A lot of this is just the Browns waiting for some procedural things to kick in before they can really actually have any more cap space left. That could be one of the reasons. Also, another reason could be because they ain't trying to sign nobody. We got to look at that as a real possibility. The next question comes from Omar, who says, out of all of our 5 running backs to be in the final 53, who do you think, or do I think all 5 will? Okay. So I don't think Browns are going to keep 5 running backs. I think Demetric Felton is probably going to be the one on the chopping block if I had to say right now, right? Let's say Jerome Ford is who I think he could be, which is a good to great level, a good running back in the NFL, a starting level running back in the NFL. Then all of a sudden that puts Demetric Felton at a weird place because Jerome Ford can do some of the pass stuff. No, he's not going to be a great route runner like Demetric Felton, but you weren't really utilizing that much this year. And with Jakeem Grant, who's going to be taking a lot of those interior snap trick play kind of things that Demetric Felton took care of last year, I just really don't see the lane for Demetric on this team anymore. So I think he would probably be the most likely one to go. That being said, coaches love to keep gadget guys like that on the roster. I just think, since Jakeem's on the team, since Demetric does not return kicks and punts anymore, it was not very good at it when he was doing it. That's going to be ultimately what costs him his roster spot. Because again, if Jakeem can return punts and kicks, run some routes, and do some trick plays, what do you need Demetric Felton on the roster for? Because you don't really use him as a straight up running back. Not saying that Demetric is not a talented player. He just, right now, he's the guy that I would say least likely could fit into the Browns' plans. But we'll see. I don't think it's unlikely that Demetric Felton makes the team, by the way. I just think if the one's got to go, and they're going to keep them all as running backs, then Demetric's the one that's probably going to go. The next question comes from Michael, who says, hey, Q, fan of the content, do you think the Broncos are overhyped? Yeah, I do. I think they're a little overhyped. But we'll see. I like Russ. I like some of their pieces they have. I think they have a good team. I don't think they have a win the AFC West type team, which is what people have been talking about with them. I fully disagree with that assessment of them. The next question comes from Soul Train. If the Browns bring back Jadeveon Clowney, how do you feel about the front seven in general? I would feel like it's fine. Not great, not amazing, but ultimately serviceable enough to get everything you need to have done, right? Will it be a good enough defensive line to have a top 10 defense in the NFL? Absolutely. If everything in the back end plays out. So, yeah, that's what I would think about that. The next question comes from Rico, who says, with the loss of Troy Hill, will the Browns use Greg in the slot, or do we have other options next season, or do you think the Browns will add bodies to defensive tackle positions? All right, so I'll talk about Greg Newsome going in slot. I have been kind of a vocal opponent against putting Greg Newsome in the slot just because I understand if you want to put Greg in the slot occasionally, but let's also remember that the Browns run a lot of cover 3, which ultimately ends up as single high, right? So cover 3, you have the one deep safety, and then you have the two corners with deep responsibilities. That's why you see Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome play off the ball a lot. But I don't want to sound like I don't understand why people want to do that. Martin Emerson, he is a much better zone corner than a man corner. So if you put Martin in the slot, you're kind of making him play a little bit more man, even though you would worry less about his ability to get beat over top. Same thing with Greedy Williams, who's a better man corner than he is Greedy is a better man corner than his zone corner. Greedy gets lost in the zone. So again, you kind of worry about Greedy and his attention span there. So I understand why people want to do it, but I just don't think the benefit of putting him at slot is high enough that it would outweigh the negatives of taking him out the boundary, which is I don't worry about getting beat over the top if I have Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome out there. Sometimes the safety position can be what it is, right? It ain't been great the last couple of years, unfortunately. But with those two players, if they get beat over the top, then I just assume the wide receiver won the route, right? I got to take that for what it is. You know what I mean? It ain't impossible, but it's hard. You got to earn it with those two on the boundary. If you put Martin Emerson out there, if you put Greedy Williams out there on the boundary, now I'm worried about whatever boundary side he's on getting beat deep, because Greedy Williams, he bites a lot on these double moves. Now, AJ Green doesn't get bite on a lot, but he doesn't have the long speed. I would actually prefer putting AJ if you want to put Greedy in the slot. And I think that, well, not Greedy. If you want to put Greg in the slot, I would say the most likely alignment would be in a dime package. You would probably have AJ Green boundary right, well, boundary weak side, and then you'll have Denzel Ward strong side boundary singled up on the trip side or on the non-trip side. So you'll have trips receivers most likely in this package that you will be going up against. You'll have Denzel Ward take care of the one-on-one on the outside, no safety help, safety going to creep over to the trip side, and then you will have AJ Green, Martin Emerson playing off coverage about 10 yards to make sure that nobody, gets thrown on a pick or anything like that. And then you would have on the inside, more than likely that would be Greg Newsome. That's the one scenario I can see you could put Greg Newsome in the slot. Not saying that they won't ever put him in the slot, but I'm saying I don't think he's going to go full slot corner, because that would be a waste of Greg Newsome. I think Greg Newsome's much better on the boundary than he is in the slot. And I think you get more out of Greg Newsome when he's on the boundary than you would if he's in the slot, right? So that's why I would keep Greg on the outside and then, see who can step up and be that inside corner. I think it's probably going to be AJ Green. I think AJ Green finds a way to get some playing time with this team. That's my thoughts on that. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But again, guys, thank you guys for watching. You guys have a great day. Have a good night.